Good evening. My name is Bao Tran, and I am a student project manager at the Clark Forum for Contemporary Issues at Dickinson College. When we held the Clark Forum in person and on campus, we took a moment to acknowledge that the land on which we gathered belonged to the indigenous people for centuries before European settlements. Currently, I'm inhabiting the ancestral land of the Lenape, the Susquehannock, the Conestoga, the Haudenosaunee, the Shawnee, the Erie, and later the Indian children of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. I encourage everyone watching this evening program to take a moment after our presentation to acknowledge the tribes whose traditional land you currently inhabit. On behalf of Dickinson College, the Clark Forum, the Department of Environmental Studies, and the Center of Civic Learning and Action, I would like to welcome you to join the discussion with tonight's panelists about air pollution in Pennsylvania. Air pollution in Pennsylvania has been a serious challenge. According to the United Health Association, Pennsylvania's air quality is ranked as the 48th out of all states. This reality made a negative impact on public health. In fact, a 2020 study reported that around 5,000 people died prematurely in 2018 in the state due to air pollution alone. Although additional studies observed a decrease in the average exposure of the general public to particulate matter, and the decrease in the number of early deaths due to air pollution between the early 2000s and 2019. Many areas of Pennsylvania have failed to comply with the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for ozone, which can cause asthma, especially in children. Furthermore, mercury emissions from coal burning power plants have adversely affected soils and streams. Tonight's event is a panel discussion on the topic of air pollution in Pennsylvania. Thomas Y. Al is currently the president of the Clean Air Board of Central Pennsylvania, an expert of environmental law for over 30 years. He conducted litigation, crafted regulation, and counseled air quality, radiation protection, sewage facilities, and other regulatory programs for the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. While working at the department, he also worked on lawsuits to curb the long-range transport of air pollutants to reduce acid rain. Germaine Gooden-Patterson is currently a community health worker at Women for a Healthy Environment, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to educate and empower community members about environmental risk so that they can make healthy choices and advocate for change. At the same time, she also sits on the steering committee at the Valley Clean Air Now, a local grassroots organization which seeks to fight for Mon Valley's residents who suffer from severe health, economic, climate, and environmental injustice. She's the sole proprietor of Wellness Within, where she encourages self-care through services and products. Naida Elena Montes is a PhD student at Temple's University Department of Geography and Urban Studies, where she conducts research in social determinants of health, environmental impacts on urban communities, and the intersectionality between infrastructure and health disparities. Spending several years as a community engagement specialist in North Philadelphia, she has led various outreach initiatives addressing housing issues, neighborhood stability and beautification, promoting educational and career opportunities for residents, and health promotions. Krishnan Ramamurthy is currently the Deputy Secretary for the Office of Waste Air, Radiation, Remediation at Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. Working for the department since 1980, he has assumed leadership roles for several initiatives, including energy deployment for growing economies, PA state-specific mercury regulation, and comprehensive permitting requirements for oil and gas exploration, development, and production facilities. Heather Bedi, who is serving as your moderator this evening, is an assistant professor of environmental studies at Dickinson College. Bedi's research examines how civil society, and social environmental movements experience and adapt to natural resources and landscape modifications related to energy processes, climate change, industrialization, and agricultural transitions. Bedi also examines energy injustice through the lens of shale gas extraction. There will be a question and answer session immediately following the program, so please type your question into the live chat next to this YouTube video at any time during the presentation. We will now begin the presentation, and I will turn it over to Professor Bedi.
Great, thank you so much. It's wonderful to have everyone here, and we appreciate all of our panelists taking time to share with our community about these important issues. So Krish Ramamurthy is going to start us off with an overview of the landscape of air pollution in Pennsylvania, and then each of our panelists are going to walk us through community concerns. So Krish, I will pass it off to you. Thank you so much.
Let me start off with some slides on the emission inventory for air pollution sources, and then give you an emission trend. And then I want to get into some statistics on various permits issued to the various sources. And then I'll try to give some examples of a cluster of sources located in certain locations. Start off, I think this is the more recent data I'm sharing. 2019, the Air Pollution Act actually requires the source of air pollution to report to Pennsylvania DEP on an annual basis. So this is actually, I'm trying to give you a snapshot of various key air pollutants from key source categories. You can see that electric generating unit dominate the emission inventory largely because that's a significant source of emissions. And however, if you, even though you see some significant emissions from the electric generating unit, the electric generating sector is shrinking actually because the coal is being replaced by natural gas. In fact, actually in 2010, 48% of the total power generation came from coal and 15% from gas. And in 2019, 20% from coal and 36% from gas. So that's one of the reasons why the electric generating sector is going to shrink. And then where the mobile sources, which I'm not showing here because they're not required to report to DEP directly. So that's the transportation sector is really increasing because of the significant vehicle miles traveled. So that's the sector actually we have to pay more closer attention to in the future. And on top of that, we have to largely depend on federal regulations for the reduction of emissions from transportation sector. This is a snapshot of the top 5 counties of methane emissions from unconventional natural gas industry. The reason I want to show is, I think it's kind of interesting set of data. Susquehanna, for example, that's a county actually where predominantly a dry gas, meaning that the gas does not contain natural gas liquid such as ethane, propane, butane. And so that's from air pollution perspective, there'll be a less volatile organic compound emissions. Whereas the Greene County, for example, even though the tons per year from methane is lower than Susquehanna because of the sheer volume of the natural gas being produced, but it is really a significant from the perspective that the Greene County has a wet gas containing natural gas liquid. So that's a significant toxic as well as POC emissions. Here's a slide I want to share to really give you a trend that even though I've been with the air program for 40 years, so I've seen tremendous changes. And in fact, actually, Tom Howe used to counsel me in the air program yeah, maybe 40 years ago. So he has aged better than me. But this slide actually gives us a trend, meaning that it's really the SO2 emissions have reduced by 94% since 1990. So it's a tremendous emission reduction of NOx, SO2, largely because a lot of the coal-fired power generation has been replaced with natural gas. And also because of the introduction of several programs DEP introduced to reduce NOx emissions. Here is the slide to really give you some idea what, I'm going to give you the statistics for Title V facilities. So to give you what is Title V, it's really a major facility with a potential emission of any pollutant more than 100 tons. That's a default value. Whereas say for example, the 5-county Philadelphia area, they have a 25-ton per year of VOC and NOx, and 50 tons and for VOC and NOx for rest of the Pennsylvania, largely because Pennsylvania is included in ozone transport region. So, and then for the hazardous air pollutants, the thresholds are 10 tons for each pollutant and 25 tons for a combination of hazardous air pollutants. So now I'm going to show you just a breakdown of permitted facilities by permit type, region, and environmental justice area. So under Pennsylvania DEP jurisdiction, we have 6 regional offices. Philadelphia and Allegheny have autonomous air program, but still they have to be at least as stringent as DEP's regulations. This is just to give you an idea of where the sources are distributed, how the air permits are distributed. That you can see the South Central just generally has this larger segment of whether it's a Title V permit or a non-major permits or a general permit. General permit is basically a permit we issue for a select source categories, and the conditions are predetermined. So anybody is seeking to use this general permit, and they need to really comply with all the conditions. So instead of site-specific requirements. So this to give you just an example of when some select areas, the sources could be clustered. So then even here, there's one of the things I wanted to stress is not all of them are necessarily a large major facilities per se. Even sometimes the facilities are smaller, but it can be, the emissions could be significant. Also, the cumulative impact of multiple sources clustered in an area could be an issue, not necessarily from directly from the health perspective, also from public welfare perspective. The nuisance issue could be significant if it is a multiple sources are clustered. So here is an example in city of Chester. The Covanta facility is a trash to steam plant, and Delcora sewage sludge incinerator. The Exelon is a power generating facility with a simple gas turbines, and you have a bunch of specialty chemical companies, and like a Kimberly-Clark and Evonik, and then you have Pennsylvania Department of Corrections where the boilers are located. This just to give you a flavor of how various types of sources can be located in a smaller area. And this is just another, the one slide I wanted to introduce, in the sense that you probably have heard about the regional greenhouse gas initiative. So I think the department is really proposing to proposing rules to really develop and finalize, join the 11-state regional market-based trading program for greenhouse gas. This is a really predominantly electric generating units fired by fossil fuel with the 25 megawatt or greater. So I think this give you a snapshot of where they are, and also particularly I wanted to give a focus on environmental justice, which is basically so you have 20% minority and 30% poverty. It's an indicator of an EJ, and sometimes people will think that I think this major electric generating units of the program may be clustered in environmental justice area. But it's not necessarily true, because these facilities are fossil fuel fired, and a lot of the coal-fired units have been shut down. Some of the lot of the gas-fired combined cycle plants happens to be in Western region, not necessarily in EJ communities. I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to give the slide is out of that 10 facilities are in EJ, and 46 facilities happens to be outside the EJ area. So I think to summarize that, I think a tremendous progress has been made in the reduction of ambient impacts. In fact, actually, I wanted to show some of the ambient impact concentrations measured by the DEP monitors, but unfortunately, time does not allow me to present those data. But tremendous progress has been made on the criteria pollutants, such as NOx, PM 2.5, and SOx and VOC, ozone. Whereas some of those, even the non-attainment for ozone standard, which when I say standard is a national ambient air quality standard established by EPA, is limited to the 5-county Philadelphia area. So it used to be widespread throughout the state, used to be non-attainment, whereas now we made tremendous progress and really reduced to only 5 counties. And I think so we are beginning to really increase the focus on monitoring of a reduction of local toxic pollutants. So they're not necessarily sometimes major by criteria pollutant definition, but it can be the concentration to the neighborhood to be significant. It's also very difficult to monitor because it requires tremendous resources to monitor hundreds of toxic pollutants. The last bullet I have is the climate change is real, and I think it's really, and that's one of the reasons why the Governor Wolf issued an executive order to be directed to join the market-based program for the electric generating units. And that's the future. We will be focusing on greenhouse gas, and not only from stationary sources, also from the mobile sources. Okay, I think I will stop here.
Great, thank you so much, Krish. That was really helpful to get the overview of the whole picture of air pollution in Pennsylvania, but also to get us thinking about what it means for air pollution as Pennsylvania may join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So thank you so much. So what we're going to be doing at this stage now is we're actually going to be looking at some community level impacts of air pollution, because Krish really gave us the overview in relation to what air pollution sources are impacting Pennsylvania, but we really want to hear from community members about how they're experiencing these things. So we're going to go starting in Western Pennsylvania. We're going to hear from Germaine Patterson, who's predominantly going to speak about the area of Clairton and the valley in that particular area. And each of the panelists are going to address two major issues. So the first is, what are key air pollution sources and concerns in your community? And also, what would you like to see happen to reduce air pollution? So I'm going to close this map and pass it over to Germaine.
Thank you, Heather. So I have a short PowerPoint that I do want to share. Okay, so as Heather mentioned, I'm going to be speaking about air pollution in Clairton. As mentioned earlier, I work for Women for a Healthy Environment. I have been working for Women for a Healthy Environment for close to, well, a year actually, for a year. And when I started, it gave me the privilege or opportunity to work in the community in which I live, which is Clairton. Also with that came a rude awakening about the air quality. And I say that because I've lived in Clairton for 16 years. However, I did not spend a lot of time in Clairton. So with me working within the community, it's given me an opportunity, or now I really experience the air pollution. And I just wanted to share this poem that I actually ran across today. Roses are red, violets are blue, bad hair days are okay, but bad air days will screw you. That's not really something that I would say, but I just thought it was fitting because it is February, Valentine's Day, and it's so true about the air quality. So this is a picture of Miller Avenue in Clairton. As you can see the smokestacks. Right here to the right, if you can see where my cursor is, to the right, I live about 100 feet from the right here. So I live 0.8 miles away from Clairton Coke Works. And right about here is where the educational center sits. So that's the school here in Clairton, which houses grades K through 8. So the proximity of the school is about 0.5 miles. So U.S. Steel is the major contributor to not only the county, but more so to Clairton and other surrounding Mon Valley areas. And I have here, U.S. Steel Clairton Coke Works is a major polluter in Allegheny County, which mostly affects communities in the Mon Valley that are closer in proximity to the Coke Works. However, the pollution travels throughout Allegheny County. Inversions in pollution do not mix. U.S. Steel Coke Works should cut production during inversion days to protect the health of the public. So these are just a few things that are being emitted into the air that we breathe. Benzene, which is a known carcinogen. Hydrogen sulfide, which is a noxious gas, rotten egg smell. And I want to speak to that. I am often awakened as early as 3 o'clock in the morning by that rotten egg smell. And there's also methane, which is an asphyxiant displacing oxygen in the lungs. So those are just a few of the particles that are emitted into the air because of the Coke Works. Some of the health effects, and I want you to notice how I have asthma capitalized. And that's because here in Clairton, there's a very high rate of asthma among children. So other health effects are heart disease, lung cancer, respiratory disease, nerve damage, brain damage, kidney damage, liver damage. And that's just to name a few. I came across at least 2 people who have sarcoidosis. And sarcoidosis is it inflames the cells. And for what I know, I do believe that the pollution most likely has something to do with that as well. So U.S. Steel had some air quality violations in events. They were fined $5.5 million since 2015 for air quality violations. In 2018, December, right before Christmas, the day before Christmas, as a matter of fact, there was a fire that damaged the pollution controls, and that fire went unreported for a few days, so they didn't report the fire. Hydrogen sulfide levels exceeded state limits 23 times in 2020, and 7 of those times were in November. And I forgot to mention that the picture that I showed you on Miller Street, that was actually in November 7th, where we had really warm, nice days. So we had inversions that days, and the pollution was horrible. It was unbearable. I personally had to come in from the outside. I was exercising and my heart began to palpitate, and I had to come back inside because of that. So some of the community asks are on inversion days that U.S. Steel should cut production during inversion days to protect the health of the public, and also revise regulations. So Allegheny County, we're counting on the health department to revise the regulations which are outdated. The next 3 slides that I'm going to share with you were shared with me by Dr. Deborah Gentile, who is an asthma and allergy specialist. And she actually has an office here in Clairton, and which she is made available twice a month for residents of Clairton. So this shows the impact of the fire that I mentioned for acute asthma visits in adults. So some background, the fire occurred at the facility on December 24th, 2018. So there was damage to the pollution controls, and there was multiple exceedances, which hydrogen sulfide, PM 2.5s were emitted into the air. So Allegheny Health Network, which is the closest hospital to Clairton, they reported before the fire, within a year's time, and also after the fire. And the next slide will show the difference. So before the fire, in green, the number of outpatient visits were 5.3. Emergency room visits were 1.9. That was before the fire, 1 year before the fire. And then after the fire, you can see it went up to 9.6 outpatient visits and 3.2. And that was for adults after the fire. And then for children, 5 out of 15 children enrolled in school-based asthma clinic. So Clairton does have an asthma clinic as well. Out of the 15, 5 required escalation of therapy. So it had an effect on the children as well. So that's the end of my sharing. I also wanted to share VCAN, which is a local grassroots organization. So VCAN, it stands for Valley Clean Air Now. And VCAN seeks to fight for the residents of the Mon Valley who continue to suffer from severe health, economic, climate, and environmental injustice by galvanizing the community to take action through local politics, grassroots organizing, community building, education, and community health initiatives. VCAN was able to get air filters through a grant from the Heinz Foundation this past spring for residents. Over 200 residents applied to get air filters, but we were only able to give approximately 50 air filters to residents. So that just shows you the need for cleaner air in the community of Clairton. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Germaine. That was really helpful to hear your personal insights into kind of how your communities experience this, but also, unfortunately, how children are disproportionately vulnerable to some of these issues. I want to remind everyone before I introduce our next speaker to please put your questions in the chat. Also, I see one already came up from Olivia about what is an environmental justice area. So when we think about environmental injustices, we think about which communities are disproportionately impacted by environmental problems. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, through the Department of Environmental Protection, categorizes an environmental justice area as either 30% people of color and or 20% people living below the federal poverty line. So if we had high levels of air pollution in one of those two categories or both of those categories, we would find those communities disproportionately vulnerable and really in need of attention comparatively. So next we're moving from the west of Pennsylvania to more the central southern part of Pennsylvania where Dickinson College is located here in Cumberland County. Thomas Au is going to address the same set of questions of what are key air pollution sources and concerns in his community and what would he like to see happen. And he's going to talk about these 5 counties that you see here. So Thomas, I'll pass it off to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen also. And I am Thomas Au. I'm here on behalf of the Clean Air Board of Central Pennsylvania, a citizens group actually based in Carlisle. We are made up of doctors, professional educators, and ordinary citizens. One of our missions is to educate the public about air quality. And you know from our webpage, one of the central points on it is the air quality meter showing the air quality in Carlisle at the present. This is a link to the EPA airnow.com website. And below that is a link to our Purple Air Network, which is a network of small monitors installed at various residences and churches around Cumberland County and Dauphin County. We'll talk about more about that later. But let's start with the question: how do we know if our air is really healthy? Well, first we look at the pollutants of concern. In central Pennsylvania, these would include ozone and fine particulate, but there are other air pollutants that we need to be concerned about. We'll discuss that in a moment. We need also to know the health impacts of specific pollutants. And we need to know what an air quality index is. Because each pollutant is measured differently and the thresholds for danger are different among the different air pollutants, generally the information about ambient air pollution is conveyed via an index. Generally, the EPA index for air pollutants says that anything above 100 is unhealthy. And we need to know how our pollutants are being measured and where they're being measured. That's important to know whether the measurements taking place in or around your neighborhood. And finally, we need to know what sources of the pollutants are. So we discussed a little bit earlier the National Ambient Air Quality Standards for 6 common air pollutants. They include, ground level ozone, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, lead, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides. We're going to focus only on particulate matter, or fine particulate today. And these are fine particulate, or PM 2.5, are particles smaller than 2.5 microns in size, which is about 1/30th of the diameter of a human hair follicle. And it is something that's basically unseen, but something that can get into your lungs and cause havoc. Indoors, COVID virus is attached to PM 2.5 particles. Outdoors, prolonged exposure to PM 2.5 can cause respiratory, cardiac, and neurological disorders, including asthma, bronchitis, heart disease, certain kinds of cancers, and stroke. We focus on PM 2.5 as a pollutant because it's an indicator about how we are doing on other forms of air pollution. One form of PM 2.5 is diesel particulate, which is formed through the combustion of diesel fuels. Toxic elements can adhere to the fine particulate, to PM 2.5, and these toxics can be transformed into tiny particles that go through your lungs into your bloodstream. We single out PM 2.5 in our community because Carlisle is a transportation hub and multiple interstate highways cross through it. And we also single it out because there are ways to reduce fine particulate pollution from diesel. So who's at risk from fine particulate pollution? People with existing heart or lung disease, older adults, and children, because children are still growing, their lungs are still being developed, and they breathe more air per pound than adults. And so how can we reduce diesel soot particles in the air we breathe? CAB has worked very hard to advance legislation to reduce idling from diesel vehicles, buses and trucks. We have General Assembly enacted Act 124 in 2008 to reduce idling, and requires signs to be posted in parking lots to tell operators that they're not allowed to idle. But it does require local law enforcement to enforce these rules. We have also supported the installation of electrified hookups at truck stops to eliminate the need for drivers to idle engines to maintain heat and cooling. And with the introduction of modern diesel engines, we can see that there's been a reduction from newer trucks and buses of diesel air pollution. In fact, you can barely see any emissions coming from newer trucks and buses. But there are other factors affecting the concentration of PM 2.5 in our area. And we have local industries and power plants. We have a lot of truck traffic going through our area. And we're the hub of lots of warehouses, highways, and interstate travel. Krish mentioned other things that might affect the Pennsylvania's concentrations of PM 2.5. Windborne air plumes from upwind power plants not located in Pennsylvania. And then there's issues such as open burning and seasonal burning of wood, such as, in the dead of winter. This plus weather conditions can lead to higher concentrations of PM 2.5. Germaine mentioned inversions. Well, we experience inversions here in central Pennsylvania as well. and we can see rapid short-term rises in PM 2.5. We rely mostly on the American Lung Association to tell us how we are doing in terms of improving air quality. As of 2019, 5 areas in Pennsylvania were among the 25 most polluted cities, and they include Pittsburgh, the Harrisburg, York, Lebanon area, Lancaster, Johnstown, Somerset. So this is where we are sort of baseline, and we need to improve on that. But I want to talk a little bit about how we measure PM 2.5. I spoke about the air quality index earlier. One of the ways that we look at the air quality maps that are provided by the air quality airnow.gov site. This was a map of December 22nd, 2019, shortly before Christmas, when there was a big inversion over central Pennsylvania. And each of those yellow or orange dots represents an air quality monitoring station. And so the readings of the shaded areas are based on what the one monitor or 1 or 2 monitors in the area reported. So that's how we look at the numbers. But on another level, we should be looking at it more on a neighborhood scale. And what we have are purple air monitors, which is a citizen-based scientific network. A purple air monitor is a small canister like this, where you can mount on a post near outside your house. And what it does is measure PM 2.5. So you can find out whether the air around your house or in your neighborhood is healthy or unhealthy. So so where can we find information on local air quality? I'm giving you a list of sites. And one of the things that the Purple Air Network does is plot each location where someone has put up an purple air monitor and list the concentration of PM 2.5 in that area. And what it shows is that air quality is not uniform across our region. Over the past dozen years, it varies. When I showed you the airnow.gov map, it showed that Harrisburg was not in the orange shaded area. Well, in fact, when we look at our current maps of air quality, there's a distinction. Camp Hill is sometimes in the orange shaded area, which means it's above, it's sort of in the unhealthy area range, and perhaps downtown Harrisburg, where the official DEP monitor is located, is not. So if you go to purpleair.com, you can go to a map which shows what the current reading is for PM 2.5 in your neighborhood if a monitor is located nearby. Well, thank you. And I want to plug in for the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. One of the benefits of adopting that plan is that there will be more money to fund the air quality programs. And one of the areas where funding is sorely needed is in air quality monitoring. And one of the best uses that DEP could put that kind of funding toward is an investment in a more robust air quality monitoring.
I think most of you know where it is, but it's always helpful to have a map. And thanks to Jim Shiroka for making these maps for this event. So I will pass it over to Naida.
Hello, everyone. So I'm also going to share my screen, and I will try to be brief. How we look at the effects of air quality in the daily lives of residents, but really looking from the perspective of neighborhood conditions, or even from the context of even zip codes, kind of larger community areas, but how we find that many of the worst conditions when it comes to chronic diseases, asthma, and all sorts of health issues are found and concentrated in some of the same neighborhoods in Philadelphia. So I put this here just to note that I'll be talking a little bit about the intersectionality of competing priorities, especially for advocates that are working grassroots and are really interested in trying to support the health of communities. And two of the next slides that I have come from the 2020 Philadelphia's Community Health Assessment.
Naida, sorry to interrupt you. If you just want to make it full screen, please, then we can see it a little better.
Sure.
Thank you.
There we go. Good. Awesome. So I just want to start here, as many of the other folks have been saying, that the prevalence of health conditions for children especially is very common. In the area that I have been working, I worked for a nonprofit community development corporation for several years called the Asociación de Puertorriqueños en Marcha. And they worked in the North Philadelphia area of the city, serving a majority, minority population, really split between like African Americans and the Hispanic community. And we find that the highest asthma hospitalization rates are in North Philadelphia and West Philadelphia areas as well. And if you look at these particular regions and look at other maps of Philadelphia, considering health concerns, they all overlap in health disparities in many of the same areas in North Philadelphia, West and Southwest Philadelphia. So when it comes to childhood asthma and chronic health conditions, 52.9% and 42.7% is what's stated for Black and the Hispanic population, which have the highest rates of asthma hospitalization rates, around 4 times higher than that of non-Hispanic white children. So this map that is on the right-hand side, with a ton of images, I want to use this as an example. When I used to work for the Temple University Lewis Katz School of Medicine, about 2 or 3 years ago, we did a walking survey where my colleague and I sort of just walked the streets in the North Philadelphia area. Our intention was to sort of support 2 of the local schools that were surrounding the School of Medicine and the university, to also support some of the community outreach work that we were doing. And when we walked and we surveyed the community, what we found was that not only surrounding the Temple University hospital and the School of Medicine, not only were there a ton of vacant lots on one side, on the other side, very close to a local elementary school, there were, so if you look at these little children here, there's a ton of daycare centers in a very small area, but there were also many businesses, churches, and what surprised us the most was tire shops and auto shops and garages. And we wonder why, you know, asthma rates are so high many times in certain communities or around certain schools. And we're thinking of the children that are walking to school every day or live in the neighborhood, and they live right next to, you know, tire shops and garages in very high dense areas. This is not like, you know, a row home and then 2 blocks away, isolated from everything, a garage. This could be, you know, a series of residential houses, a daycare, and an abandoned car lot, or a garage, or a tire shop. So when we think about air pollution, we're looking at the very day-to-day lives of people and what it is that they have to face as they move along in their everyday lives. So as an overview, my perspective is that of a resident, but also a practitioner. So there were things that I wasn't necessarily aware of, as one of our colleagues here mentioned, until I started working in this nonprofit organization. Taking public transportation was extremely normal to me. That is how I went to school. There are studies that have come out that talk about the pollution in subways, but there's also this idea of how much toxic air are residents that depend on the buses because they are lower resource and they have to take public transportation. They're all alternative. They don't have alternatives, right? So I either take the bus to get to school or work. I either take the subway, and there are reports about the quality of air in the subways, or I take the bus and I'm waiting outside and I'm consuming all of the toxics from all of the cars that are going by. And the lower income communities, many of them have the highest traffic of buses running through their streets, especially because they're used more frequently. So there's this idea of public transportation. When we think about what it is to be environmentally friendly, we advocate for, yes, let's take the subway because it is more environmentally friendly than using cars. At the same time, there's a air quality issue that is probably not as spoken about when we think about the concerns that really plague some of the lower income residents. There's that car and traffic. There are car and traffic issues, but also low tree coverage in certain communities. There are reasons why many residents, when you ask them, do you want trees, that they may push back, right? And as a practitioner or an advocate, trying to support the air quality in certain areas, maybe we find that a resident may not want a tree because they are worried about them damaging sidewalks, or they are worried about the cost or the maintenance, or they have a tree in the back of their yard. Their roots are already growing up the back of the wall and destroying their house. And until you talk to people, you don't actually know, right? So then you just assume, wait a minute, people just don't want trees, but there's always, another side to the story. In the North Philadelphia region that I also spoke about, that same area is basically known as one of the heat islands of within Philadelphia. So where you have low income residents and in some places very low tree coverage, then you have rising heat and residents that can't always afford air conditioners or to fix their houses, to weatherize their houses when it gets really, really cold. So you have two sides of that. And then how that affects the asthma rates and also the air quality when you can't get proper ventilation, or they're heating their houses with, maybe things that are not as air quality friendly because they can't afford certain electric bills or things like that. So they're using alternatives to heating. And I mentioned already the garages and the auto shops. It is easy to say, make that illegal. There should not be a garage or a tire shop in the middle of a block. At the same time, we're also talking about a low-income community where many times these businesses, although they are an unhealthy source of employment, it is employment. So when you look at it from one lens to try to find a solution that is disconnected from the community reality can also be more damaging. Nonetheless, we understand that it is a health risk and there are air quality problems because of the amount of garages and auto shops that are in certain communities. Philadelphia also has a lot of new development happening. There's a ton of construction. Gentrification is a whole other topic, but there's a lot of construction and demolition that is happening. And a lot of communities are not only pushing back because of the gentrification and what that is leading to, but they're pushing back because they're saying these construction sites are not being monitored, and they're demolishing properties, or they're building, and the air is just horrific, and no one is really holding anyone accountable for what they're doing, as there are so many new developments happening in certain communities. And many times, because it's gentrification, right, it's especially going into some of the lower income communities where residents sometimes feel powerless to knowing how is it that you address or report certain contractors that are doing things not air quality friendly. And one of the really important things is that Philadelphia is an old, very old city. So the majority of their housing stock actually is very much in need of repair. So not only do we talk about air quality, but lead, thinking about weatherization, and then the whole issue of asthma being so prevalent in certain areas, and the hospitalization rates that are happening in certain communities. And lastly, just because I think it's a reasonable mention, is the refinery that we had in South Philadelphia. Many local community advocates were rallying to shut the refinery down. We're talking about the cancers that was happening, the people that were employed there, but also ended up being very sick in this struggling community. And I believe it was last year, fairly recently, that the refinery closed down. The refinery closed down because it exploded. So that is a whole other topic of like air quality and affecting certain communities. So being that I come from a city and some of these issues are all overlapping in the same area, in the same zip codes, in the same parts of Philadelphia. When we talk about air quality, we have to think about intersectionality. What I would hope would change is that people would open their perspectives to seeing how, if you work in transportation, or if you work in health, if you work in air pollution, many times people think you have to be specifically an air advocate in order to deal with air pollution issues. No, there are so many intersectional things that work together to improve or make air quality worse. So it's really important that in order for us to be successful in our advocacy for improved air quality, that we think about the intersectionality, and we think about scale, not just just Pennsylvania-wide or city-wide, but also neighborhood-wide, zip code-wide, and like really hone into what is it that neighborhoods are facing. We talk a lot about race and racism. And in order for us to help people understand what that really implies, as opposed to just being sort of like a popular topic now, if you were to compare what communities are facing, the layered issues that they're facing, as opposed to some of the more affluent communities, then we could really start building a case for race and racism, and how that plays into our narrative of air pollution and the inequalities that communities are facing. So I will leave it there. And
thank you so much. So many great ideas about intersectionality, but also the importance of having air pollution programs and approaches that are really effective. So Bao is now going to open up the floor. If I can indulge everyone in the audience to stay a little bit longer, we have great questions. And Bao is going to put a few of those to our panelists at this stage. If everyone can turn their cameras back on the panel, please.
This is now the start of the Q&A section. I asked the panelists to respond the same order in which they presented to the audience questions. The first question from our audience is, are there legal protections for people who become ill or disabled because of the toxic environmental conditions?
I guess that's for me to go first. Well, it's really difficult it's extremely difficult to sue because of the fact that it's hard to prove that your illness is coming from one particular source of pollution. So I don't know of too many individuals in terms of air pollution were able to sue because of health conditions. That most likely came from a particular source, but it's hard to prove because there are so many sources of air pollution.
Okay, thank you. The next question that we have is, how do we measure PM 2.5 levels and other national ambient air quality standards from the transportation sector, and what are the trends and the predictions for Carlisle and Cumberland County?
Okay, there are various ways of measuring transportation ambient air quality. One is what we suggested, which is to put out more PM 2.5 monitors. One of the things that you also can measure for related transportation is the level of nitrogen dioxide. There are very few nitrogen dioxide monitors in Pennsylvania. And third way to measure is to measure the level of ozone in our ambient air. Those are all related to transportation. Now, in Cumberland County itself, DEP only has one monitor, and it measures only PM 2.5. Does not have monitors for ozone or hydrogen or nitrogen dioxide.
The next member of the audience asked, are there AQ monitors publicly available? And if so, what is the update schedule?
I'm not sure what the question means in terms of publicly available. Monitors, the small purple air monitor that I showed earlier, which is a small canister, can be purchased from purpleair.com for about $250. This is a very high accuracy monitor, and it can be installed anywhere where you have a Wi-Fi connection and an outdoor electrical connection. But it only measures particulate matter, PM 2.5 and PM 10. It does not measure other pollutants.
Well, thanks, Thomas, for your answer. The next question, the audience wants to ask, is if Susquehanna County is not an EJ area, is this a sacrifice zone?
Okay.
Well, maybe the way the answer is, is the question is, are people being affected by methane and other emissions in Susquehanna County? And there may be lower income populations in Susquehanna County as well. And even though it's not officially classified as an economic environmental justice community, that doesn't mean people are not affected.
The next question is, how does Pennsylvania collaborate with neighboring states in air pollution?
Yeah, that one, maybe I can take it. Yeah, air pollution is actually a transport pollutant. And that is one of the reasons why US Congress actually created a ozone transport region comprising of multiple states. So we have to really work with the neighboring states to come up with a strategy to really address ozone. Because sometimes the tremendous amount of nitrogen oxide emissions can be generated in one part of Pennsylvania, but it can really migrate to other states, and it can really affect even Baltimore or somewhere down the stream. So that's one of the reasons why that Ozone Transport Commission was formed, and then we are one of the members, and then we work together as a team to really come up with the strategies. Besides that, there is one other mechanism Clean Air Act allows is if a particular monitor in Pennsylvania, for example, is not able to achieve attainment with the National Ambient Air Quality Standard because it is coming from upstream from some other state which we don't have a jurisdiction. So we can really petition EPA to really address a particular plant which is impacting in our state. Same way as some other state can petition EPA to address a source in Pennsylvania because it affects in some other state.
Thanks, Krishnan, for your answer. The next question is, have residents been contacted to give their opinions on air quality program in Pennsylvania?
What is the question again?
Have residents been contacted to give their opinions on air quality programs in Pennsylvania?
Oh, okay. Yeah, in fact, actually, when we propose a rulemaking, actually that we do provide opportunity for states, general public, along with the affected sources to comment on the rulemaking, and we do factor those comments. In addition to that, I think obviously if there is a specific authorization or a permit issued to a particular source, and we do publish the receipt of the application and solicit public comment on the particular source, whether the controls are adequate or whether there are other issues they would like us to address. So I think we do factor the public comments in a variety of ways.
In addition to those specific source comments, the state also publishes amendments to its state implementation plans. And when it publishes an amendment to the state implementation plan, DEP solicits public comment on the changes to the plan. And every year, DEP also publishes its air quality monitoring plan for the upcoming year. So the public can ask for changes to the air quality monitoring plan as well.
Thanks, Thomas and Krishnan, for your answer. One member of the audience have one question for Naida. And the question is, like, have there been any investments in more efficient or electric public transportation in under-resourced areas of Philadelphia?
I'm not sure what the exact response to that would be. I know that there are, efforts to make sure that there are public transportation in very high need areas. But I think that the intersectionality piece happens when, the discussion of like public transportation is a little bit disconnected from the reality of what residents are facing. There are some, electric buses that have come out, but really the need is so vast. And when it comes to the subway, I'm not sure how much has actually been done to actually improve the subway system. And the other thing is that in comparison to the regional line that goes into other regions of Pennsylvania, I think the subway system that is probably most affected by air quality issues is the one that local residents and many of the lower income residents are taking. But with limited budgets, obviously, I have not seen any real changes in some of the more popular stations that service local residents.
Thank you, Naida, for your answer. And this next question will be the last question, and I would like all members of the panelists to answer this. Regarding the trade-off, perceived or real, between economic development, jobs, and air pollution, Could the panelists comment on how that plays out in their work and what they see as promising response?
I can answer. I don't want to mispronounce your name. Naida? I think she touched on it a lot, how all of those things intersect. So as a community health worker, I am finding that, for instance, air pollution is not at the top of someone's list if they cannot put food on their table. So all these things intersect, all these things are important, but as a family, you have to prioritize. So all these things intersect. Transportation or lack of transportation, which happens here in Clairton. By the way, Clairton is also in EJ community as well. So there's so many things that overlap. So I can't remember who said it, but anybody can speak up for air pollution, but you almost have to work in that area to speak up, because you just have to speak up for others. I think I answered it.
I can piggyback off of that really briefly. Like, some of my research in my geography program that I'm trying to build has to do with housing as an environmental justice source, sort of using the lens of environmental justice to inform the housing infrastructure and the issues that are found with indoor air quality. Really, if people working in different fields, be it transportation, be it specifically in health, be it in housing, be it in jobs and employment, with new organizations that are coming out for like solar panels and things like that, which offers more job opportunities for people. If we looked at it from that perspective of like, how do I connect my work, even though I am not an air pollution, advocate, how do I connect my work to improving air quality, not just outdoor, but indoor, or in the spaces that our community residents are, or even the schools, even school advocates, then we can move sort of that conversation forward. And as Germaine mentioned, being a health advocate, I've worked with health advocates that have been placed in schools and say, there's an air quality issue here, there's an issue with asbestos and lead, and we are afraid to even say anything because we rather have our, parents would probably be in an uproar because they rather have their kids have access to a local school as opposed to not knowing or being displaced. Or if you say something, what are parents going to think? So there's a lot of like complexities of even bringing up air quality problems, not just in homes or in urban housing or in, with the housing authority or even with the school district, all of these things. And this is why certain communities continue to bear the brunt of all these issues, because what happens when you really say and you press and say, this is an environmental justice problem, our transportation system and what's happening in our schools and what's happening in our communities and all of those things, to be able to say this is an environmental justice problem sometimes has an alternative effect. And many times advocates may not be ready for that or don't know how to push without making things worse.
Yes, thank you for saying that, because one of the things that I didn't mention is that Women for a Healthy Environment, that is one of the things that we do. We have a program, a Healthy Homes program. And so one of the things that we do is that I just started going into homes virtually and helping residents pinpoint asthma triggers. So we have programs, we have 3 programs: Healthy Homes, Healthy Schools, and Healthy Child Care Centers. Very important, the environmental exposures indoors.
I agree. I think indoor air pollution is equally as important as outdoor air pollution. And that if you can reduce your exposure to indoor air pollution, you will come out healthier. And everything that has been said is touches on the problems of environmental justice communities. And I think, communities, when they're considering economic development or redevelopment projects, ought to be looking at the air pollution consequences of those projects. And not only, it's not a one-way street. I mean, there are ways to mitigate pollution when you're developing or redeveloping projects, and it doesn't have to break the bank.
From a programmatic perspective, we face this issue all the time. I think so. One of the things, anytime we try to really require a project developer to minimize the emissions to a level, then they constantly say this is really going to drive the job out of this area and then go to a nearby state, and trying to really pit us against some other state is a constant argument. I think this is one of the things we try to really struggle on a daily basis to make sure that the emissions are reduced in a cost-effective manner, at the same time very protective of the public.
Thanks everyone for your answers. This is the end of our program. I would like to thank tonight's panelists, our moderator, Bedi, and every member of the audience for attending tonight's event. Have a good night.
Thank you.